Now we're moving to a masterclass, and we're really glad to have here the international film reporter at Deadline, Zach Ntim, who will be presenting you the person who he will be having a masterclass with. So Zach, are you here with us? Zach, here you are. Hello, Zach. Hi, good to have you here. You take the mic, and it's yours.
Hello, nice to see you all. I hope you've had a good day. I think we got an interesting session now because we've got a filmmaker who's done a lot of really interesting things. He's got quite a unique story. He's been a director on things like SNL, the great series Documentary Now, Marvel's Hawkeye. So if you could please help me welcome our guest. I don't know where he is. There is Rhys Thomas. He's coming down now.
Working. Hello, hello.
Great. Rhys, so starting, you're British, right? You're from South Wales.
Yes.
And you have a really interesting story, but when you Google you kind of, there's like no backstory. There's just like your great credits. So I guess my first question would be, how did you end up being a director on so many interesting projects like this, working in the States in particular?
Ignorance, a little bit. I grew up in South Wales, in far from any understanding of how you got into film. I loved film growing up. I was a sort of child of the video store, and always fascinating with it. But yeah, did not think. I didn't know about film schools. I didn't know about. Mentorship programs at the BBC or anything like that. So essentially I sort of looked outward, and basically after university I went to New York on a bit of a whim. We sort of had someone whose floor we could sleep on for a few months. That was kind of the guarantee. And yeah, spent a long time trying to figure out how you penetrate the film industry in New York from the outside, PAing for free and all of that stuff, and just sort of stumbled into SNL in a way, sort of lucky opportunity. I think my British accent helped me. I met the film director at Saturday Night Live in the film unit, which I didn't really know anything about. I met with him, and he invited me a few weeks later, essentially, to become his assistant, and that was my film school. Again, it's not a useful story to anybody, really, because there was no engineering, there was no. I just an opportunity presented itself, and I stepped in, but. At Saturday Night Live, they make, at the time when I started, you'd make a film in 3 days, basically, every week. The script would come on Wednesday night. You'd prep it on Thursday, shoot it on Friday. We shot on film then as well, so you'd go through that whole cycle. So I got to learn very quickly. I got to see this top-to-bottom process, and then it was going on national television on Saturday, and so I got to see that over and over again, and that was basically my education in film. And I became a line producer at SNL, partly about lying about my experience during summers in between seasons. I basically spent most of my career being in over my head, just by pushing a little bit more, sticking my hand up when there was an opportunity, but not really knowing what I was doing, and then kind of figuring it out.
See, that's the advice, lie. Everybody should lie.
Yeah.
The thing about comedy that's quite particular, and speaking in the context of SNL, it's like a very specific type of American comedy. And comedy, I think, as everybody always says, frequently says, is like very specific to regions. So I wondered, was it difficult to come in and work on that kind of American comedy, and taking that experience, how have you developed about how to best present comedy in different contexts?
That's a great question, because I wasn't really that familiar with Saturday Night Live. I knew what it was as an institution growing up in the UK, but back then, especially, you couldn't see it in the UK. So I think this second or third SNL that I ever saw was my first week working there. And I honestly did not really get it. I didn't understand, there were funny bits, but it didn't live up to the expectations I'd given it in some ways. And because it's a live show, it's topical. It moves quickly. The show is written that week, and so it took me a little while to sort of understand that context and sort of figure it out. And then it also moves in these cycles where you have a good cast, you have some highlight cast members that have a specific tone. So anyway, sorry. Essentially, as a Brit, I didn't get it at first. Took me a little while to settle in and understand it. And honestly, I started directing there maybe I'd been there for about 8 years. But when I finally started directing, so at that time, I really sort of had a sense of it. But I also think that I also understood that I could bring a slightly different sensibility to when I had that opportunity to start doing things. That was also my entry point. I've always liked drier humor. And I also knew at that point I'm not as funny as anyone in front of the camera. So don't try to be funny with what you're doing. My job actually was usually to take it as seriously as possible. And that's kind of generally the approach on almost everything I've done. Is I respond to really absurd ideas and enjoy then taking those absurd ideas way more seriously than you might expect. And I think that's sort of what Documentary Now sort of became, and Comrade that sort of, I guess, comedic taste to me is this sort of fluid thing. Everybody here has a different version of what they find funny. Everybody here has a strong opinion. More people than not like to tell you that things aren't funny. They love telling you something's not funny. And so it's intimidating if you start thinking about it that way, and about trying to please everybody. And so, what I sort of discovered was, you really do genuinely have to just go by your instinct. And if this amuses me, then there'll probably be someone, maybe somewhere, that's kind of all I got to go on.
Talking about Documentary Now, and I assume everybody in the room is familiar with it.
They're probably not.
Could you raise your hand if you know what it is?
There you go.
I think that's about right.
That's a good ratio.
It's a really great show, which, to anybody who doesn't know it, essentially each episode, it's a show that maybe sort of satirizes classic documentary cinema. And it came out at the time when I was still a student, and it was kind of really seminal for us because it was so daring, and it felt like it was something that was. It was almost like watching film criticism live, on a TV show. And I wondered, how did that show come together? How did you get involved in that?
That came out of SNL. My contemporaries at SNL included Bill Hader, Fred Armisen, Seth Meyers, John Mulaney, all very funny people. And so we had collaborated on various short films and et cetera at the show. And basically we made a short documentary for SNL that sort of became the template for Documentary Now. So it was a fake documentary about a fake British punk band. Essentially, it was about this guy called Ian Rubbish, who was the only Thatcherite punk artist in the UK, and we made it in a day, but it was one where I really enjoyed. It was the first time I'd done the documentary format, and what I enjoyed doing on that was we really went out of our way to create realistic-looking archival footage of his performances in the early '80s. we staged a fake, a recreation of the famous Sex Pistols television interview. All of that stuff, all those details that the documentary now became. Mixing formats. We got Steve Jones from the Sex Pistols to sort of be a talking head to sort of justify who this guy was. So that was sort of, we basically took that to IFC and said, look, we don't know what the show is, but it's something like this. Luckily IFC, which is a network in that's sort of under the AMC umbrella in the US, they were excited to work with Bill and Fred. They'd worked on Portlandia with Fred. And so they kind of gave us quite a lot of freedom to work it out, because we didn't really know that we were going to be satirizing actual documentaries when we started. We thought we maybe would just be making them up, and it was around Grey Gardens was the documentary that sort of kind of unspooled the show for us, in that Seth had a very funny kind of idea of riffing on the Grey Gardens documentary by the Maysles brothers, and we sort of zeroed in on that, and then suddenly we sort of had worked out a approach.
That documentary is so funny. Like I recently rewatched that because I think it's on Criterion now. It's like insane.
Yeah.
But if for anybody who doesn't know, Documentary Now is also kind of hosted by Helen Mirren.
Yeah.
She sort of like opens every episode. I wondered, how did you get Helen Mirren to do that?
By asking Helen Mirren to do it. We kept, again, as we figured out the show, we realized that the conceit was so niche. Our desire essentially when we made it was like, I would love it if someone was flicking channels and they stumbled on this halfway through an episode and they thought it was a real documentary. That was the sort of goal. And but we realized that we might need some sort of pad as a way in to ease people into it, and also there's a sort of masterpiece theater format on public access television in the US. So we sort of looked at that template and we thought, wouldn't it be great if we had someone just with some authority? And we kept saying, someone like Helen Mirren was like the example that we were using, and then one day we sort of realized, why don't we just ask Helen Mirren? And weirdly she said yes. But I don't think she realized she was sort of committing to 4 seasons worth of hosting duties. But yeah, she's great.
Those 4 seasons. Is there going to be a 5th? Because I think about documentary cinema now, particularly like in this contemporary space, and it is so easy to satire because it's kind of ridiculous. Like you have the Harry and Meghan stuff and stuff. Will you do a 5th season?
Yeah, very possibly. We've been very lucky that the way the show has got, we haven't followed a traditional route in that we were commissioned for the first couple of seasons. Then we took, I think, 2 years between the second and third seasons, and that sort of picked up once we felt like we had enough ideas. It's always been a little bit of a passion project for all of us involved. Everybody has other, Seth hosts a talk show, and Bill makes shows like Barry and is in movies, and so it's a little bit of a game of trying to get everybody together. I do feel we have a little text thread, and sometimes ideas start to snowball, and then maybe we'll do it. Yeah.
So there's no immediate plans? There's
no immediate plans, but oftentimes someone will watch a documentary, whether it might be an old one or a new one, and it might set off a little chain of sort of observations about it.
And you mentioned these collaborators here, John Mulaney, Bill Hader. It's quite an eclectic bunch, and I think maybe they all share something that is quite unique of on-screen talent, is that they feel like kind of auteur-y. They feel like filmmakers, people who are really interested in the craft. So I wondered, how do you go about, this might be useful for people in the audience, how do you go about building these sort of connections with people and people that are useful to work? Like how do you go about doing that?
It's interesting. I mean, I think my whole approach, arriving again in New York and finding your way into, into places like SNL or any job really, I think what I realized was like, you just have to figure out how to make yourself useful. That's the key to anybody. You know, I think any job is look at what, you know, where can I slot in and you know, contribute. And I do think that's sort of what my path through SNL was. That's why I would put my hand up for things that I didn't know how to do. And I think the same, you know, then went for, that finding my place at SNL, because it's this institution, you know, that's been around for so long and has had so many iterations and so many different versions of sort of what works at the show. It changes as well. You know, there's sort of recurring characters. Sometimes, you know, we had the digital short era with Andy Samberg and music videos. And so it was a little bit of trying to figure out, okay, well, if I have this opportunity, how do I carve out a spot here so people are going to come to me for something specific. And so, it's, and again, I'm a fan of film. I mean, that was the connecting piece for Bill and Melania and Seth and those guys. We all did enjoy talking film. You know, we had, you know, that was the topic of conversation. And a large part of the work that I carved out that I did at SNL was often actually genre parody. You know, I did a lot of short films that would be maybe referencing, one week I'd be doing Wes Anderson, and the next week I might be doing Tarantino or a Tony Scott film, or, you know, and again, like I said, you'd get that script on a Wednesday night sometimes. That's when you'd find out if you're doing it. So I had to, you know, I'd have, while we're prepping, location scouting, you're trying to figure out, okay, what's the visual grammar of this filmmaker, what tells an audience quickly what type of short film this is and how it works and what are the rules and where are the funny jokes within that. And so that was also another layer, I think, of what brought us to, or, you know, why I think I tuned up for documentary now, is that I've always enjoyed the sort of formal aspect of film, and I enjoy people who sort of grapple with that and manipulate it. So, yeah.
I want to ask you about Comrade Detective, which I think is one of the most unique TV projects I think I've read about in a while. It's the show that you made with A24.
Yeah.
And it's shot in Romania. Can you talk a little bit about how that came to be and what it ended up being?
Yeah. So, that was A24. I think there's their first TV project. And basically, after Documentary Now, I think I maybe identified me as a person with more exotic tastes when it came to sort of television. And so I met with the team at A24 generally, and they were just setting up their TV side, like I said, and basically sort of threw out this concept as the type of thing that they were thinking of doing, of that they wanted to do something different. And at the time, they were going to buy. Two writers had come in and pitched an idea where they're basically like, why don't we buy a sort of existing Eastern European TV show, you know, from the 70s or 80s. There's some great, you know, police thrillers essentially that they'd found online, that they said, well, why don't we buy the rights to one of those, and then we will rewrite it in dubbing, and we'll just redub the entire show for comedic purposes. That was the idea that was pitched to me, you know, and I had no involvement in that there, so I said, okay, great, good luck with that. That sounds fun. I'll see you later. And then 6 months later, they sort of called up and said, you know, you remember that idea we mentioned? It turns out it's very expensive to get the rights to one of these shows. We thought maybe we'd make one. And so the job on that was basically make a show as though it were made by the Romanian government in 1982 as a piece of propaganda. That was sort of the starting point for it, which again appealed to my sense of you know, taking on a character when directing something, and so that's what we did. And it was weird because we, you know, again, like you said, it's a really bizarre concept. And by the way, sorry, the whole idea as well, we shot it in Romanian with a full Romanian cast, full Romanian crew. We edited it in Romanian, but the goal was always that we were going to come back and then we were going to overdub it afterwards. So we had Channing Tatum was attached as a producer at the beginning as well, which I think is what gave us the freedom to do this idiotic idea.
And so the original, from what I've read, the original Romanian version's never been released, right?
No, frustratingly, yeah, well, not frustratingly. We cut it, we sold it to, so we made it, A24 financed the show in its entirety. So we made it with total freedom. We were able to figure it out as we went. There was no traditional pitching process, notes process on the script. It was me, myself, and these two writers and our one executive A24. We figured it out as we went, and then we shot it, and then we sold it to Amazon afterwards. After we cut it, they saw the Romanian version and bought it, and then we overdubbed it. Unfortunately, they only paid for us to do the audio mix on the English version. So the Romanian version exists, and I made sure to, when we re-edited, we did have to re-edit a little bit to accommodate the English, but I made sure that we never violated the Romanian version underneath it. So I still hold out a hope that version will go. Because I think HBO in this part of the world did buy, for a moment, buy the show, but weirdly they wanted the English version. They didn't want the Romanian version. So, yeah.
What was it like building a production in Romania, like coming, like, kind of wholesale from the US to Romania? Like, were you working with Romanian crews, or like, did you bring everybody across? Like, what was it like building that sort of team?
It was we basically brought on Romanian production partners, and I had a British director of photography that I brought in, but that was the only other foreign crew member. Honestly, it's funny because on documentary now we've done similar thing. I shot in season 1. We shot a couple of episodes in Iceland. I did an episode in Icelandic, and then season 2 we've done one in Colombia in Spanish, and we've done one in Hungary. So I enjoy. I've actually, that's another layer. Like I really do like that experience of kind of stepping on someone else's turf and letting that become part of the process of sort of figuring it out and sort of seeing where it goes. So, and that one in particular, again, it was set during the communist regime in Romania. It was about that. And so, we were very aware that we were not an authority on it. We had no right to really, do it. And we were aware it was a sensitive, area as well. But so that was part of the process, was actually bringing on, this team. Our scripts were very fluid, short prep time, but a lot of the script work was done incorporating conversations with our Romanian partners and the crew and people, and so yeah, it was useful to do it that way.
It's a really interesting point about sort of like the scripting stage of doing things that maybe don't directly relate to yourself, and like in between like documentary now and your later work, there's a lot of stuff that, like, for example, like Kimmy Schmidt, obviously you're not a woman from the Midwest, and then there's was it Chad, which is about like a Iranian teen, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of stuff in there that I guess takes a lot of you have to take yourself out of it. So I wondered, away from like scripting and building productions, like your visual work, how are you sort of figuring out how to place yourself as a director in these worlds that are quite different to your own? Again, to me, it's always character. I think, I think I respond to character when I whether it's, an idea, or if I receive a script, it's sort of seeing, can I find a point of view in here? Does the point of view belong to this kid? Like in the case of Chad, it was, it's about, that show was about an Iranian teenager in the U.S., but the extra layer was that it was a boy, that Iranian teenage boy was being played by a grown female Iranian woman. Someone, I also worked at Saturday Night Live. But that one was very much, the whole visual language of that show was very much grounded in his specific kind of warped point of view. And that sort of dictated, I think, the way I sort of built the show and thought about it. And like I said, sort of, documentary now, every episode is completely independent. It's a whole brand new film each time. And so we might be making, the Maisels brothers, one episode, and then the next episode might be parody. We made fun of Vice, the contemporary documentary format, and so yes, part of the
job is basically switching characters for us behind camera as well. Because, you know, in the case of the Maysles brothers, you know, studying how do they, you know, the Maysles brothers, when they, you know, if they're covering a room, you know, they're in a room with these two ladies, where do they stand with the camera? How are they cutting? You know, in the case of the Maysles brothers, they often hide their zooms. You know, you don't feel an active camera. They wanted to feel kind of invisible, and so they're quite static and not too active, and so that's part of the game is sort of, you know, working that out, being very strict with it, which actually is quite liberating once you say, okay, this is the rule, we're not going to violate it no matter what. Even if the joke would be funnier if I could get a close-up, I'm not going to do it because they wouldn't do it, you know, and it's, you know, so that I actually find that process, you know, that's oftentimes the thing that gives you the grounding. I find it's a lot harder when you're trying, you know, I've done sort of TV pilots as well in a more traditional sense that came through, you know, a pitch and has a network, and it's a much more of a sort of maybe a mainstream kind of idea. Where it's harder to find that anchor because you're sort of trying to please everybody. You know, like every character's going to be important, so therefore this person's story is as important as this person in this room, and so you're sort of covering things in a very general way to give the showrunner options later on. And I much, you know, to me it's much more interesting and also easier when I kind of know, like, no, this is it. This is the point of view, and I'm you know, I'm not going to violate that.
It's a really interesting point, and it just makes me think, like, these are all really sort of ambitious projects, particularly something like documentary now, which is always changing. You're also a producer, and I wondered, sort of setting up these quite ambitious projects, what specific things do you think you have to do to create an environment that is conducive to making something that works? You know, what are very, like, specific, like, rules or things that you always do to make a project work?
You know, it's funny, I remember early on, after I made Comrade, someone wrote a review of the show, and they made a comment that, you know, between Documentary Now and Comrade, the unifying thing was that I didn't seem to care about the audience. You know, which I think they meant it, I think, in a nice way, I think. But it is true. It's like, I do think that sometimes that layer of jumping ahead to, like, what are people going to think about this, can stifle and make you trip up. And you know, and you do, like I said, going back to SNL, where you kind of had to fly by your instinct. You do have to sort of just ground yourself in, like, you know, what do I think works? What, you know, and then build a team that obviously tonally understands what you're doing, what you're trying to do. And the interesting thing with Documentary Now, again, I'm sorry that we keep coming back to it when so few people know what that is.
You should all go watch it. It's really good.
But, you know, the interesting thing on that one is we've taken the production. Our first 2 seasons we did in Los Angeles. Our 3rd season we did in Portland, Oregon, and our 4th season we actually did in the UK. And so each time, you know, once we moved, we'd setting up a completely new production team. And in the case, and then also, like I said, we went to Iceland, Hungary, and it was really interesting coming to these foreign countries, and the UK especially, where we had to introduce people to this whole concept of this show and educate them very quickly on how specific we were going to be about the visual language, the art direction, that, you know, like every detail on that show. Like, we really, you know, worked very hard. And oftentimes in comedy, people like to assume that, I don't know, I've met this at least, people sort of assume that the comedy is just going to be the actors and they're going to say funny things, and really who cares what it looks like, is you know, like, that's often an attitude that you kind of are met with first. And, you know, and on a case of documentary, or in a case of everything I've done, it's like that nothing will get under my skin more than that attitude. and you know, so it's kind of, you have to sort of build this team and educate them and encourage them. And I've found in every case, on Documentary Now especially, by the end of it, you know, you've got a crew that is so proud of you know, people love getting into the weeds. You know, you got the prop guy that actually, you know, made some, he tracked down the exact same, I don't know, toilet sign that you saw in this one shot in that documentary, and he's remade it exactly the way it was, and they get, you know, it becomes this point of pride. So you know, it's infectious once you can get people on board, but it's not easy. And, you know, again, when I was telling you earlier, when we did Comrade Detective, our budget was so low on that show, and the idea was so weird, and we went to Romania, and I remember we had our first scheduling meeting, and, you know, they just, you know, we had a lot to shoot. It was 6 episodes, and I think we did all 6 episodes. They were, you know, about an hour, 45-minute streaming, you know, hour or whatever. We had 30 days to do the entire show, and there was action in it, and like, because it was this police thriller. And so the Romanian producers had assumed that I was going to shoot it handheld. They're just, well, you know, 2 handheld cameras, and I was like, no, we can't. You wouldn't do that in 1982. So why? Like, no. And I remember everybody, they were all just like, ugh, you know, everybody treated me like I didn't know what I was doing, and that I was just like arranging my own funeral. And again, and it makes you sweat for a moment. You're like, oh shoot, am I, you know, because yeah, day one, you're like, if I don't make the day, then they're all going to be like, yeah, look at you, asshole. But you know, again, we stuck with it. Again, set the rules, pursued it. Luckily, I had a DOP who was, you know, completely on the same page and committed that way as well, and we figured it out, and you get there. So yeah, it's just sticking to those rules.
Awesome. I mean, I have to ask you about Hawkeye and Marvel, and just thinking now about everything you've been saying in your work, it feels really antithetical, like, to work on something like Hawkeye, because your work has been like really quite subversive. So I wondered, were you interested when that opportunity came, like initially? Hey,
look, we're all whores. No, that's not. No, you know, you get an opportunity for a bigger budget, and it's Marvel. I mean, honestly, like, I'm not a snooty person. Like, I want to be entertained, and I like entertaining things, and I actually really enjoyed Marvel up to that point as well. I was a bigger fan. So, and I was surprised as anybody when I got a call to come in and meet with them. But, you know, but honestly, what interested me in that show was that it was this Hawkeye character, which, amusingly, like, if you Googled him, you know, amongst sort of fans and stuff, like, people were not interested in Hawkeye, you know, because he doesn't have any superpowers. He's a real guy. You know, he's essentially just a guy that has an incredible work ethic. It was basically his strength, and that's what kind of I found interesting. And, you know, actually also the comic book run that they highlighted for me as a sort of tonal reference was this Matt Factor, specifically a run of Hawkeye comics that was written by Matt Factor, and not Factor, Fraction. I was saying wrong. Matt Fraction said that, and that was very much grounded in this guy's in Hawkeye's washed up kind of energy, like, that he was this real guy. He was in pain. He was beaten up. He made mistakes. You know, it was really the story of just an ordinary guy, you know, with this kind of just odd, really, you know, poor sense of self-worth. And so, yeah, there was a lot of interesting things about it that just like, oh, that doesn't feel like Marvel to me. And again, you know, it was a weird process coming into that, because actually the meeting I had with them was right before the pandemic. Like, you know, I think the world shut down, like, literally, like, the next day. And, you know, so I actually started a sort of fairly organic conversation after that conversation where they shared with me their outlines that they had. There was no time constraints, so I got to look at those and send my thoughts and some ideas, and then, you know, and I didn't, every time I sent it, I was like, I don't know if, you know, I don't know if I should or if they want it. And then, you know, I'd get a response and feel a little bit better. And then lo and behold, they start sending me the first script that they started coming out, because the writers were sort of working. And I'd send some other thoughts and ideas. Then I'd maybe hop on the phone with the executive. I wasn't on the job. I wasn't on the show yet. You know, and then I started seeing some of my notes kind of appearing in some of the scripts, and it was, you know, it looked good. But it was probably about sort of 3 or 4 months of that sort of early pandemic of doing that. before I pitched how I do the show to Kevin Feige and the team, you know, and then of course it being Marvel, I came on board and they completely threw everything out that they had before, and we started writing the show again, which was great, you know, because now I had another opportunity to try and make it a little bit more, you know, more in line with the tone that I could do. I don't want to. It wasn't mine. I mean, the interesting thing about that structure as well, you know, you guys were talking about show running earlier. Marvel, they were in the beginning of their TV, you know, era, and didn't really have. They didn't want to. They decisively told me, like, we don't have showrunner. We're not going to have a showrunner. You know, we're going to sort of, it's going to be a hybrid of the way we do our features, and Marvel is the showrunner, was sort of the way it was kind of set up. And, you know, of course, it's an inexact science, and probably each show had its different demand. And I think since then they have adopted more of a showrunner structure, but it weirdly created an interesting place for me because you know, I did have, you know, I had a good relationship with our executive producer and with Kevin, and we cycled through a few different writing teams through that process of sort of rebuilding it. And so, you know, there was a fluidity to it that also sort of made it interesting, and I don't know, unlike any kind of TV project that in a traditional sense. It was hairy for sure. We were again, you know, I've been reading about James Gunn's sort of, you know, plans to not sort of, you know, never to throw a movie into production without a script at DC. That was not the way that we did things on Hawkeye, but
you went into production without scripts.
I was prepping, like, you know, we were into the last weeks, and they were still very much kind of coming together and then getting rewritten as we went, and you know, we knew where the story was going, and but it was fluid. But also, you know, to me, I actually think that's. When you've got characters like, then you've got actors like Jeremy and Haley that we had on that show, like, I think having some of that fluidity to respond and to understand what works, you know, in these people's voices. They were brand new characters, you know, so being able to actually, you know, shoot a scene, work through a scene, rehearse it, and realize, like, you know, maybe I wouldn't, you know, Jeremy frequently didn't want to say much, you know, and that was his character. In the script, because we had all this exposition, we had him saying a lot, and he was this genius at kind of knowing, like, I can say that entire paragraph just like this. You know, and he could, you know, and like not many people can. So anyway, so having that freedom to kind of, you know, and no rigidity in terms of like, this is what we need, it was good. Yeah. Again, to me, it's like every show you kind of need to. I don't agree that there's, you know, there should be a template about how, you know, I think every show kind of needs to find its own structure, you know, as to who the leading voices are, who understands it, you know, and give it some little bit of breathing space. And I know that doesn't work for any executive who's putting money behind it. You need a structure to feel safe. But on the creative side, I like some fluidity.
Would you do it again?
Marvel? That's a good question. No, I would. I mean, honestly, like, again, it was so incredibly, it's insane, like the scale that you get to work on and the people you get to work with, you know, at the time, you know, from casting it, you know, like the lists of actors that they would pick up the phone, you know, which is not always the case. And, you know, we built Rockefeller Center in Atlanta. Like, we built the ice rink in the ground floor, the entire plaza in Atlanta. You know, there's not many places you get to do that. So, you know, yeah, that side of it, of course. But, you know, but I also like, I definitely came out of it longing for another season of documentary now as well, which we did. So, yeah.
Just a quick look. Hey, who's got questions? Because if you have questions, I'll go to you. But if not, I'm gonna continue because we've got like 5 minutes left. Does anybody have any questions? I can't really see. No, I think we're good. You made a feature.
Oh, yeah.
Stan Adam Summer. And I wondered, like, that's your only feature, right? Is it your
to date, yes. And that was interesting because I'd only been, again, it was done, and Lorne Michaels produced it, and I'd only been directing for about a year at the show, and yeah, the way that one came about was I was summoned to Lorne's office one afternoon, and I walked in, and he had his back to the door, and he went, "Rhys, we have a movie we're going to make. Colin is going to write it." Colin Jost was sitting over there. "Paramount are going to produce it." There was some Paramount people there. "And you're going to direct it." And I hadn't seen a script. I didn't know what it was. And we had a sort of cursory conversation. And then next thing I know, I'm sort of going home, and they're asking me, you know, "Can you go to LA to meet with Paramount to talk about the film?" And I don't know, what is the film? And they sent me a script on my way to the airport. It was about 160 pages of just ideas. So I didn't know what to talk about still by the time I got there. And anyway, it's not a recommended way to make a film, but we did it. The interesting with Lorne was that he's like sort of a force of nature. So there was an opening to make a film, and he just stayed on that thing, you know, no matter, okay, the script's not ready, doesn't matter, you know, like, don't, you know, just if the opening's there, go for it. And I remember, you know, on that one, the window to shoot it, we had to shoot it in the summer between seasons, and it was coming up quick, the window where we could get cast, etc. The script was still, there was no narrative. That's something I've learned working with comedy writers, is they don't love narrative. They're not good at narrative always. Sketch writers, I should say. And I was fighting, like, you know, we need a story. I need to know what this is. And Paramount, I remember, like, they actually backed out. They were like, "Maybe we're not ready to make it this summer." They were like, you know, take the next few months, and then we'll work on it next summer. Lorne was basically like, "If you do that, it's not getting made." So he was basically like, "I'll pay for it, and you know, we'll just keep going." And you know, I remember he called me up. He was like, "You know, are you comfortable doing that?" And of course, I'm not going to say no. And so we did. And yet again, I was in prep without a script. I remember we actually physically had to lock Colin in an office to try and force him to actually focus and write. He's a lovely guy, but at the time, to try and get him to hone in on that was a job. But anyway, yeah, so that's my feature story that I don't tend to talk about too much.
You said it's your only feature to date. Are you interested in working on features in the future? And what else generally would you like to do?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think I've been lucky to sort of work in television in a, you know, almost in a slightly more feature modeled way. You know, sort of having a sort of sense, a certain freedom tonally, and so, yeah, and like I said, I came into things as a fan of film, so that's where my heart sort of always lied. And I just, like I said, I didn't go to film school. I didn't know anything about the biz. I still don't know anything about business, and so I've gone a very long road towards, I think, wanting, you know, to try and just want to continue making film, so yeah, you know, I'm probably like everyone in LA. I've been in development on all sorts of things for past few years, and you know, I have a film that's sort of right on the edge of going. But film, you know, nothing is real until you're actually making it. So yeah, who knows? But at the same time, television, you know, I'm the thing. You learn quickly is, you know, you've got to kind of keep making your own path, and especially if you tonally you want to be specific, or you know, something. If your taste is something that you're not seeing, you've got to make it. So again, I've you know, developed relationships with different writers and showrunners that I've worked with over the years, that we sort of continue to develop things together, and I do like coming onto things early in that way, and you know, I like working with writers and helping shape that. You know, I like the rewriting process. The idea of starting with a blank page terrifies the hell out of me. So I'm glad to have people that are willing to sort of go through that pain, but I'm very good at giving notes. So.
Awesome. We're about to run out, but I have to ask before we go, because like SNL, like everybody is on that. The sort of list of guests is crazy, like people like Prince and stuff, and obviously the people who are on the cast also great comedians. So what's the one story that sticks out in your mind, like that was crazy during your time on that show?
Oh, SNL. Yeah, I mean it's all quite crazy. I mean, you know, I don't know. I've got all sorts of stories of sort of, you know, late nights, and a frequent thing that would happen in SNL is that an actor would show up. You'd have whoever, you know, some Hollywood A-list person, and we'd have 10 pages of script to shoot, and the actor would arrive dressed in some ludicrous costume, and then their handler or a producer on the show would show up and go, "Okay, you've got 3 hours," and then they're walking. And that was a fun. It just became this fun thing to kind of handle over and over again. But you know, crazy story. I mean, actually, the sort of, you know, it's funny because sort of more generally a crazy story that, like, an absurd one relating back to Marvel is this musical that we ended up doing in Hawkeye. There was a throwaway joke in one of the early scripts about there being this Rogers musical, like a musical set in the Marvel universe, but it was just a mention of it, and in the same time we were trying to puzzle through episode 1 of that show, like, you know, there's a lot of backstory to kind of acknowledge and set up, and trauma for Jeremy's character. It was also, and you know, every sort of iteration of the script kind of had, you know, just felt quite dense in exposition, and it felt like you were waiting for the actual story to start, and we kept puzzling over it. And then I remember, you know, on a sort of meeting with Kevin, just kind of, you know, having this sort of half idea of like, well, what if we do the musical thing? Like, what if we make it, and it'll, you know, and it's about the Battle of New York, which was the thing that Jeremy's trauma was related to. And the other thing, the trouble we were having was trying to figure out, like, how do we get him from his home in Missouri to New York? Like, why, you know? And so the whole first episode was about him being in Missouri and then choosing to go to New York. And it was like, well, and what if he's just been invited to that? So that's why he's in New York. There, and it was sort of became this stupid kind of shortcut sort of idea. And then next thing I know, like, we're in the Fox Theater in Atlanta with this kind of weird, and we hired Mark Shaman, the you know, amazing composer. He wrote the music for it, and we're shooting this absurd Broadway production recreation of the Battle of New York, and it's set within the Marvel universe, and it, you know, and again, I remember feeling this is the stupidest idea, and people are going to hate it, and you know, and again, Marvel fans are rabid. This is like idiotic. But then it sort of, later on anyway, in hindsight, it was like, wow, we solved so many story problems, because Jeremy was sitting there watching it, you know, with a close-up, you show his trauma as he's, you know, it goes from being fun to seeing you go internal with him. And anyway, that was one of the things where I sort of kind of came out of feeling sort of proud of having stupid ideas.
Great. Well, we're out of time. Thanks so much for joining us, and say thank you to Rhys for being here.
Thank you.